Today, an FDA approval in acute lymphoblastic leukemia, priority reviews in chronic myeloid leukemia and breast cancer, ODAC recommendations in ALL and acute myeloid leukemia, and a clinical hold on 3 multiple myeloma trials. Welcome to Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus. The FDA has granted a full approval to blinatumomab as a treatment for adults and children with relapsed refractory B-cell precursor acute lymphoblastic leukemia, regardless of Philadelphia chromosome status. The approval of the anti-CD19 immunotherapy was based on data from the Phase 3 TOWER study, in which the median overall survival with blinatumomab was 7.7 versus 4 months with standard chemotherapy for patients with Ph-negative relapsed refractory disease. Findings also showed that treatment with blinatumomab reduced the risk of death by 29% versus standard chemotherapy. The application also contained data from the Phase 2 Alcantara trial, which demonstrated the efficacy of blinatumomab in patients with Ph-positive relapsed refractory B-cell precursor ALL. Here, the median OS was 7.1 months. 16 of 45 patients achieved a complete response or CR with partial hematological recovery during the first 2 cycles of therapy, including 4 of 10 patients with a T315L mutation. Also, MRD negative status was achieved by 88% of CR and CRh responders. The FDA initially granted an accelerated approval to blinatumomab as a treatment for patients with Ph relapsed refractory B precursor ALL in December 2014. In chronic myeloid leukemia, the FDA accepted a supplemental new drug application for dasatinib for use in children with Philadelphia chromosome positive chronic phase disease. The agency also granted priority review for a powder for oral suspension formulation of dasatinib. The FDA is expected to issue a final decision on the sNDAs by November 9, 2017. The priority review designation is based on Phase 2 results from the CA 180226 trial presented in June at the 22nd Congress of the European Hematology Association and the 2017 ASCO annual meeting. In the trial, more than half of patients reached major cytogenetic response greater than 30% within 3 months. The cumulative rate of major molecular response in the refractory intolerant cohort was 41% at 12 months, 55% at 24 months, and continued increasing over time. At 12 months, MMR was 57% for newly diagnosed patients assigned to tablets and 45% for those assigned to PFOS. Those responses increased to 75% and 64% respectively at 24 months. The FDA also granted a priority review to a new drug application for abemaciclib as a treatment for patients with advanced hormone receptor positive HER2-negative breast cancer. The NDA is for 2 indications, the first of which is as monotherapy for patients with HR-positive HER2-negative advanced breast cancer previously treated with endocrine therapy and chemotherapy for metastatic disease. The support for this indication comes from the single-arm Phase 2 Monarch 1 trial, in which the median progression-free survival in this patient population was 6 months and the median overall survival was 17.7 months. The second indication is for abemaciclib in combination with fulvestrant in women with HR-positive HER2-negative advanced breast cancer with disease progression following endocrine therapy. The support for this indication comes from the Phase 3 Monarch 2 trial, in which adding abemaciclib to fulvestrant reduced the risk of disease progression or death by 45% versus fulvestrant alone in this patient population. In a press release, Eli Lilly and Company, the manufacturer of the CDK4/6 inhibitor, reported that it anticipates the FDA will make its decision on the application by the first quarter of 2018. The Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee voted 10-0 to recommend approval of a biologics license application for tasanjalucil for the treatment of patients aged 25 or younger with relapsed refractory B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The committee cited unprecedented clinical success and calling the drug potentially paradigm-changing when announcing its decision. Tasanjalucil, also known as CTL-019, is the first CAR T-cell therapy to enter regulatory review. The FDA granted a priority review designation in this patient population in March 2017. The agent showed an overall response rate of 82.5%, with 63% of patients having a complete response. Currently, the FDA requires 15 years of follow-up to monitor for subsequent malignant transformation for the Tesangilis investigational new drug studies. ODAC concluded that the strong efficacy data presented and the long-term patient monitoring plan by Novartis, the manufacturer of the drug, deserved approval. The application will now go to the full FDA for consideration. In a separate meeting, the FDA's Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee voted 6-1 in favor of approving gemtuzumab ozogamicin in combination with daunorubicin and cytarabine for the treatment of patients with newly diagnosed CD33-positive acute myeloid leukemia. The committee agreed that the anti-CD33 antibody drug conjugate administered in a fractionated low-dose schedule was safe for use in this patient population. The FDA is scheduled to issue a final ruling later this year. Pfizer, the manufacturer of the therapy, submitted results from the Alpha 0701 trial, the randomized phase 3 trial comparing daunorubicin and cytarabine or without gemtuzumab ozogamicin for the treatment of patients with newly diagnosed AML to support this biologics license application. Gemtuzumab ozogamicin was associated with a statistically significant improvement in event-free survival of 7.8 months, but the drug was not associated with a significant improvement in OS. The FDA does commonly use OS as the endpoint to confirm clinical benefit for the treatment of AML, so the committee had to determine if improved EFS outcomes were enough to justify approval. In multiple myeloma, the FDA placed a clinical hold on the phase 3 KEYNOTE-183 and KEYNOTE-185 pembrolizumab trials and ordered the discontinuation of the lenalidomide dexamethasone pembrolizumab arm of the KEYNOTE-023 trial. All three studies were evaluating the PD-1 inhibitor in patients with myeloma. In a statement, Merck, the developer of pembrolizumab, said that the FDA determined that the available data indicate that the risks of pembrolizumab plus pomalidomide or lenalidomide outweigh any potential benefit for patients with multiple myeloma. In June, Merck announced that it was postponing enrollment in KEYNOTE-183 and KEYNOTE-185 after an independent data monitoring committee noted an imbalance in deaths among patients with multiple myeloma assigned to combination therapy involving pembrolizumab and immunomodulatory treatment. This week, Dr. Corey Langer of the University of Pennsylvania discusses the significance of the FDA approval of pembrolizumab in combination with pemetrexed and carboplatin for patients with non-small cell lung cancer.
There was a randomized phase 2 that I had the privilege of presenting at ESMO in the fall of 2016, which showed feasibility, and I would argue striking response and progression-free survival advantage for the combination of immunotherapy, specifically pembrolizumab, with pemetrexed and carbo compared to chemo alone. This observation was restricted to non-squamous, non-small cell. It should be noted we did not observe a survival advantage, although it was very early. There was crossover that was built into the trial, and the median follow-up was less than a year overall, so we really didn't have a chance to see very many survival events. Nevertheless, in May of 2017, there was a formal approval for the triplet in wild-type non-squamous, non-small cell lung cancer, specifically individuals whose tumors did not harbor EGFR mutations or ALK translocation. This has really completely altered the therapeutic landscape. We now have an additional option of combining pembrolizumab with standard PEM and carbo in these patients. I have some ambivalence, simply because we've not yet seen a survival advantage. We've seen survival overall that looks better than historic controls, but really in both arms of the study, including the control arm, which crossed over to pembrolizumab. We're also still awaiting the results of a much larger prospective randomized phase 3 trial. This approval was conditional, it was accelerated, it was based on randomized phase 2 observations. Nevertheless, if I have a patient, regardless of PD-L1 status, non-squamous histology, wild type, no oncogenic driver, and no contraindications, no autoimmune disease or other comorbidities that would make immunotherapy difficult, I will potentially offer that individual this triplet combination. And my experience, both in the context of the clinical trial and now more recently outside of clinical trials, generally been quite positive.
Thank you for watching Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus.